I'm Autumn Brown, a queer science fiction writer, a mother of dragons, and a healing justice facilitator for social movements living in rural Minnesota.
And I'm Adrienne Marie Brown, and I'm losing it. Okay, I am Adrienne Marie Brown, though. You know what's funny is when I'm really scared, I start laughing, and this podcast episode is one of the scariest we've ever offered you guys. So anyway, I'm Adrienne. It's about climate apocalypse. It's
That's
like
right.
totally
That's why you're scared.
I'm like the end of time. So let's talk about it. So anyway, I'm Adrienne Marie Brown, author of Emergent Strategy, author of Pleasure Activism, and co-editor of Octavia's Brood, a Black science fiction writer and a Black facilitator living in Detroit.
And this is How to Survive the End of the World,
our podcast about learning from apocalypse with grace, rigor, and curiosity.
So this is a very exciting show in spite of all the fear
Terror
that is coming through it. Since we started this podcast, we've wanted to interview the amazing folks at Movement Generation. The Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project inspires and engages in transformative action towards the liberation and restoration of land, labor, and culture. They are rooted in vibrant social movements led by low-income communities and communities of color that are committed to a just transition away from profit and pollution and towards healthy, resilient, and life-affirming local economies. And organizationally, Movement Generation has been holding so much at the heart of what we need to turn and face right now, and really how we need to be organizing ourselves in terms of the apocalypse that we're currently in.
So we're joined today by Michelle Mascarenhas-Swan, who is on the Movement Generation Staff Collective and has been on the Movement Generation Planning Committee since 2008. Her core roles with Movement Generation are Just Transition Training and Strategy, Movement Generation Strategy and Organizational Development, Climate Workers, and Funder Engagement. And fortunately for us, Michelle and I are in the generative somatics teaching community. And I have looked up to Michelle basically since the day I met her. I just think she's one of the people in the world who has an outstanding brain and is using it for our liberation. And I often, I have come now to expect that when I sit and talk with her, sit and listen to her, that I'm going to be changed and I'm going to have my view on the world expanded and challenged. And it's really exciting. And so we did each year, Generative Somatics comes together for teacher training several times a year to develop the body that offers all of the programming we put out into the world. And we have strategic commitments that we're working on, and one of them is really around the climate apocalypse. So in one of our recent teacher trainings, Michelle came to offer political education to our community about what is happening with this climate crisis, the catastrophe. And we are lucky enough that GS is letting us use the audio from that talk as part of our podcast material today. And so then Michelle and I got to sit down and just frame this up a little bit, like who is she coming into the work, who's Movement Generation. And so we just want to offer you the conversation with Michelle and then the talk that she gave, which is just amazing. We hope that you're moved by it, that it changes you, and that you share it with as many people as you can. All right. Hello.
Hey, everybody.
So I am sitting here with Michelle Mascarenhas-Swan. Am I saying that correctly? Mm-hmm. I love that name, Mascarenhas.
Well,
is it Teach me.
It's Michelle Mascarenhas.
Oh,
it's
Michelle Mascarenhas,
like an
Swan
N-Y.
with the N-Y. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, the NH is like an
This
N-Y.
is how we love each other, I think, just by learning to say our names correctly. And what we're going to be offering to our audience today is Michelle recently gave a talk to the generative somatics community about the work of Movement Generation, and we have been trying to land an interview with Movement Generation for a while now, but time travel makes it all difficult. And so we got permission to use the audio of that talk. And then Michelle and I are both in generative somatics teaching community, and so are grabbing a moment because I just wanted to ask you a few things to help frame this up for people. So the first is, my experience of you is basically like you just arrived in the world fully formed as a complete genius who has the answers to guide us out of this climate catastrophe and life catastrophe into something that we could actually survive and that our children could survive. Like, I feel deeply grateful for your work all the time. And I'm interested, how did you become you? Like, when did you get tuned into the fact that this was all happening? Where did you start to pick up on, like, oh, these could be some of the solutions? Like, can you tell us a little bit about your journey to this point?
Sure, yeah. So I grew up in the suburbs of Southern California, on paved over strawberry and strawberry fields and orange groves, you know, where all the tract homes were named after those things, right? So I didn't feel like I had a really strong connection to the land or nature really at all, until I fast forwarded to kind of college age and ended up somehow doing an apprenticeship on an organic farm on the East Coast, and really saw both like how messed up the food system was for small farmers, like family farmers who couldn't make it even when they had their own land, but then also how absurd it was that mamas were coming an hour on the train to get organic food for their kids. You know, this was the 90s, when the beginning of like organic salad mix and things like that, and the Brooklyn farmers markets. And so really seeing like this big gap that was the systems that this economy has set up for meeting needs was so wrong on all sides.
Yeah.
You're good. Keep going. Yeah, so from that, I began doing work in Los Angeles around connecting small farmers, family farmers, with community-based organizations like child care centers and Head Start preschools and schools, and that really brought me to ask this question of how come what we build serve as a tool to actually deconstruct and dismantle these systems, and also starve them and like block them from accessing the resources of life, you know, so that we can feed something else.
That's great. I love that story. And it also makes me curious. I mean, there's so many points along that where I'm like trying to imagine little baby Michelle being like, I need to do this next. I need to do that next. But it feels like there's a lot of, I feel like what's happening in this moment is like a lot of people have these individual stories of being like, oh, this could be done totally differently and should be done totally differently. And starting to make that connection between, it's not just pulling it down. It's actually, we have to be growing something up that allows us to make this transition. So I want to hear now how you found the crew that you currently roll with, the Movement Generation crew. Like, how did y'all, as unique particles in the world, all being brilliant, how'd you find each other?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. We all came out of different sectors of organizing. So some of us were labor organizers or environmental justice organizers or, doing different work, economic justice. And we came together around this moment in about 2006, 2007. So it's post-Katrina. And our organizers were having conversations in the Bay Area about what did it mean that the climate crisis was now like more on our radars, but still our movements didn't really have ways to think about it and understand how are we going to actually step to these moments when our folks are in crisis. And that was kind of the genesis of it, and we brought together a couple folks. In the beginning, the first conversation was like between Van Jones and Dave Henson, who's the director of the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, which is
such a cool guy.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I feel like he changed my whole relationship to water.
Yeah, and Brock Dolman, who's there also, is part of the Water Institute up there. Yeah, and they have, along with Kendall Dunnigan and many other folks up there, helped to really root us in a ecological systems thinking that also is about how we think about redesigning human communities to be in sync with the living world around us. So it just was like a blowing open our minds. Like we just all had seen this edge as a place we wanted to go at the same time. And and we all had bases of folks that we sort of called into this conversation based on trust, because a lot of them were like, what? That's not my thing. I don't do climate, or I don't think about ecology. And so tenant rights organizers and immigrant rights organizers and, all these folks to try to step to them just based on our relationships. And then that really, catalyzed a whole conversation that has continued.
Yeah. And so I came to a movement generation training, I think it was like 2011 maybe or something. Was that, is that possible?
Maybe even earlier. It might have been like 2009.
Yeah, because it was like, I know. Oh yeah, because I think I was still living in the Bay. So it must have been 2009. And my experience of it was, you come in, it was like over a few weekends. Like it was like a weekend and then a few months later, a couple, something else. And so the first weekend is like, face reality. Yeah. And, I remember thinking, and like people talk about like, oh shit, there's this face reality part that y'all do. But can you tell me a little bit about what your thinking was for the methodology of like, first people need to look at what is, and then we can start to talk about, solutions. Like, what was the thinking there? Is that how you still approach it?
Yeah, it is still how we approach it. And I think, as organizers especially, we're so quick to jump to what's the strategy? What do I need to do to take care of this? Yeah. And in a way, it's like Adrienne and I are here at a generative somatics conversation, and I've learned so much from how we think about the body and how we think about our movements. And it's like, what's actually at our backs, and can we just feel into the despair, the grief that humanity does have to actually feel about the loss of species and the polluting of water and all of these things, right? In order to then step to the strategies from a much more grounded and holistic place, right? Because it's not just coming from like, what do our campaigns have to teach us, right? It's like, what do our ancestors have to teach us?
That's right.
What does the soil have to teach us? And so that continues to be our methodology, and we encourage people to go deep and feel. And I think the piece that's really critical to that, and we get asked this question a lot, is like, especially young people are having so much despair around being alive in this time on the clock of the world, as our elder Grace Lee Boggs taught us, right? That it's important to feel the despair, but it's also really important to do that in community with folks and on land that can hold us. So,
I love that. So what I imagine happening now is probably we'll play the audio for folks, and I want people to really just get to drop in with it.
The mainstream definition of the problem is climate, that the carbon in the atmosphere is increasing, right? Because fossil fuels are being extracted from the ground and burned up. And then, have folks heard of 350.org? Right? Folks know what that means? 350 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere. Right, carbon dioxide specifically in the atmosphere. And so that's a target that organization that's led by Bill McKibben, 350 parts per million is like a kind of a line in the sand that organization drew in a way that says we can't burn up any more fossil fuels or else the atmosphere is going to not be able to hold anymore, and the seas are going to warm, and all the things that Rachel was just naming are going to continue to accelerate. Now, just so people get a sense of the pre-industrial level of carbon in the atmosphere was 280 parts per million, and now we're at we just hit 415. So take a minute, think about that, and like. we actually talk about this in our movements of climate justice as carbon fundamentalism, because it's really just looking at one tiny little slice of the problem and then lining up all the solutions at that. Like it's like silver bullets. And what are some of the solutions that you've heard coming out to climate? So Adrienne saying carbon taxes, the Paris Agreement. So like global accords of governments coming together and setting agreements around how much they can continue to pollute, and on what timelines, right? What else? Solutions to climate. Come on, y'all have all heard them. Plant some new trees. Recycle. Buy a Prius. So solar energy. Natural gas. Paper straws. Eat less meat. Nuclear energy. Yeah. Wind. Yeah. Making a transition plan so that coal workers can transition out of those industries. Go to Mars, people. Yes. Elon Musk has a plan, a planet B, right? Like, yeah, the Green New Deal, right? So, lots of solutions, right? Oh, also, how many people have bought an airline ticket and you can buy an offset for your carbon pollution, right? Has anyone ever seen that little thing on your airline? Yeah. You can do that, and then ask Alvina all about offsets, how well they work in places like Richmond. Yeah, so it's basically, so you get to go like live fat and fly this airplane across the world while someone else has to like go on a diet, right? Yeah. Yeah. Carbon sequestration. There was $1 billion put into a coal plant in the South to create a carbon sequestration coal burning power plant, so that they would then sequester the carbon that was polluted into the earth. It didn't work. Those companies got hella money, let me tell you. And not just private money, but tax credits and all kinds of public dollars to that solution. Also biotechnology, right? There's all kinds of like, we're going to have some biofuels that will be hydrocarbon based rather than fossil fuel based. So there's lots of solutions actually being put forth when the problem is defined as carbon in the atmosphere. Yeah, so I think that's like the really important thing to start with is just, and that we need to notice every time we hear climate change, is like, how is the problem being defined? And then what are the solutions, and who do those benefit, and who is paying the price, right? So I would say like true climate justice, like a frontline definition of the problem is actually the system has to change, not the climate, right? There's this whole system change, not climate change. And so that we can't just look up into the air, into the atmosphere and count carbon. We have to look down at the places we live and count exploitation. Because it's actually the theft of land and the resources required to meet our own needs as peoples that allowed this system to force our bodies into shit jobs that our peoples never wanted to do, to destroy the places we live or the places someone else lived, right? So economy is actually the crisis. Right? Economy is the crisis. And it's not a separate crisis of economy, an economic crisis over here and a climate crisis over there, right? It's not yeah, and it's not separate crisis from the prison industrial complex or from state repression and violence and what borders do to lands and peoples and rivers, right? But if you didn't watch it, you could see in the video that Gopal narrates there. The word economy has the root eco, which just in Greek comes from the word echo or oikos, and it just means home. And so you could think of like really economy is just management of home. That's actually what the word means. And when we've done this with Native folks, it's beautiful what you just named, Che, and the opening of like how important the storytelling is. We got to be part of a Native Alaskan organized climate justice camp a couple years ago, and the first day was just transition told by the elders, and it was incredible. And I want to like out myself and say, like, the night before at the dinner, and I sat down with one of the elders and I was like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about, I didn't really know exactly what was going to happen in the couple days. I just knew we were on day 2. And I was like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about just transition. And in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, you probably don't know what I mean by that. Right. And like my like colonized mind was like, and this man had been working on really just a just transition framework to be able to share outside of Native communities for decades and decades and decades, and that's what they shared on day 1. And it was like hours and hours and hours of like just listening to the stories, right? Listening to the stories of people rooted in place for generations and what the sacredness of that had meant to their worldview and what it would mean to protect those places. So the motto of the environmental justice movement, I think, is one of the things that like moved me to do this work is like no decisions about us without us. And we as humans can say that, right? Like we can speak it out loud, but all beings have that right? No decisions about us without us, right? The river has a right to run free. The beavers have a right to build a dam, right? Like we could go on and on, right? And there's whole sets of I want us to actually, at some point, it would be fun to do some like principles of ecology and how they relate to somatics and bodies, right? And specifically around queer ecology, which the Queer Ecology Project is amazing. Like there's just incredible richness. And when we think about like nature actually abhors a category. Nature does not categorize like you're this and you, you have sex only like that. Like that's bullshit, right? So understanding across living systems what diversity and difference and all of that brings and generates to systems, not that we can ever understand it, but seeing it, naming it, believing it, and holding it sacred, right? That's like actually at the root of how we need to be moving. So this no decisions about us without us, I think is like a really critical motto to keep in mind. And right now, like the management of home, the way this economy works has almost nothing to do with observation, reflection, regenerative action, permission, consent, repair, healing, and a scale and pace necessary for any of that. Right. Yeah. So as a result, the key crisis is actually the crisis of life. It's not just a climate crisis. It's like a symptom. The crisis is the crisis of life itself. It's the crisis of biocultural diversity. We are in the 6th great extinction in the history of life on this planet. It is the most rapid in pace, thousands of years rather than millions. It has the most potential to be the most complete, and it's the only one ever caused by a single species. Yeah. Sucks. And folks might have heard a couple weeks ago, early May, there was a report released by a whole, 650 scientists across the world through the UN on the crisis of biodiversity. And they said this thing that Native peoples and peoples all over have been saying, that MG was kind of started to help to spread the word in our movements about, which is human society is in jeopardy from the accelerating decline of the Earth's natural life support systems. Right? So all the life support systems. We're talking about 1 million species at risk of extinction. We're talking about the biomass, like the actual bodies, right, of wild mammals having fallen already by 82%. Kind of like this idea that there will be no charismatic megafauna left. Right? People know what that means, like that, the lions, the elephants, the giraffes, like the beautiful species that our babies think about when they read bedtime stories, right? That remind us of where we come from. Natural ecosystems having lost half of their area, the pollinator loss, right? Bees, half of the Earth's topsoil has been lost in the last 150 years. And then water, right? The crisis of water. And that water is life. And yet we put everything from sunscreen and cosmetics with microplastics and birth control pills and pharmaceuticals and bleach and cleaning products and industrial pollution, right? All of that just goes into the 1% of water that we have available to us. 70% of the planet is water, right? And only 1% of that is available as fresh water. A lot of that is locked up in glaciers, which are now melting, but not necessarily making them more available to us, right? And then we're polluting a bunch of that. Yeah. Yeah, and then I want to say, like, so that's biodiversity, and then critical to that is cultural diversity, or what we would say biocultural diversity. And by that I mean like the encoding of our ability, like our relationships as human communities to that life, right? Which is not from the perspective of like that, that picture, that famous picture of like when the first man on the moon shot a picture from up there of planet Earth, and like that created Earth Day and, that kind of thing, right? Like, no, actually the perspective has to be like from the places that you live, looking out into the universe and seeing the vastness, right? From that place that is different, totally different on any spot on the planet, right? The way the bend in the river nuzzles against the hillside and the curve of the land and the buzz of the insects in the spring and the wind direction from summer to fall, right? And language is part of what encodes that relationship. Songs, stories, very specific words, right? I remember talking to a friend of mine who spoke Mandarin after we both had given birth to our second kids, and she was like, you know, in my language, there's 33 words for melancholy. I was like, damn, I need those words. I feel some different kind of way every day like that, right? So, and yet, the planet stands to lose 90% of living languages within one generation, right? From 6,000 to 600. And it's critical to name that this is like indigenous peoples, right? Indigenous peoples account for 80 to 90% of our the world's cultural diversity, encoding our capacity to live in right relationship to those places. And yet every 14 days a language dies. Yeah. So we're in the midst of a transition, right? That's clear. And the question is, will it be just? And the way we know that is like who leads is going to determine both where it lands and how it goes, right? So who we like bet on, to use that language, right? Where we invest our resources, attention, love, like capacity, is going to inform like who's going to lead this transition, right? And so the solutions then from like an internationalist, anti-imperialist perspective, I think like the first is we fight for what we love, right? We fight for what we love. And I've learned this, I mean, mainly from the fact that indigenous peoples everywhere, especially in the last 5 years, like on Turtle Island, but like historically, of course, always, but also from La Via Campesina, which is like an international peasants movement, movement of movements, is like the number one thing is restore native sovereignty. That's the number one solution to the climate crisis and the crisis of biocultural diversity. Restore native sovereignty. And we saw this, like, it was super powerful when that Seattle action happened. Remember, during the beginning of BLM and the Bernie Sanders campaign, and folks got up and took the mic, and the first thing they did was recognize the unceded land upon, like, whose unceded land that was, right? And declare sovereignty, or like declare their allegiance to that sovereignty, not this flag, right? And then deeply rooting in place, like for those of us that aren't native to the places that we live, how do we deeply root in place in right relationship, including like right relationship to the peoples whose lands we're on, right? And then I think, like, I mean, the main thing is, like, if we're going to shift from an economy whose purpose is about the concentration and control, like the ever increasing enclosure of wealth, any wealth that's created, like, how can we grab that, right? Your couch is free, how can we Airbnb that? Your car is free, how can we lift that, right? How can we profit and extract off of all the things that people, earthworms, beavers, like all the living beings create, right, through their work. And as the margins get thinner, as the margins get narrower, then that's going to get scarier and scarier, right? The ways that they find to extract. And so instead of that increasing concentration and control that is the purpose of this extractive economy, we have to shift to forms of economy in which the purpose is sacredness, caring, and whole systems well-being, right? Ecological and ecological systems well-being, right? The rerouting of people in right relationship to place. And so we think about like some of the strategies of that are reinvestment, reparations, and just like give it back, like restoration, right? And also the tools and skill sets, right, that are required to restore then habitats and waterways and food sheds and trade sheds, and even know what those should be, right? We have these like political borders instead of knowing our ecological boundaries. Yeah, we have for reals. So, thanks, Adrienne. Yeah, so that is really like the number one task of our time, is to restore human communities' reflective, responsive relationship to place. Let's take that back, because that's what they've stolen. I mean, that's one of the many things they've stolen, right? Stealing people from place, stealing places from people, and in that, the cultural genocide that, of those cultures that encode our capacity to live in right relationship to place, to keep them going for 7 generations beyond, rooted in 7 generations before of like that knowledge, right? So I think for us, like one of the ways we think about this is like permanently organized communities. Like all of our organizing has to be driven towards fostering permanently organized communities, right? Whether we're fighting prisons or we're fighting detention centers or the borders themselves or, economic justice, like whatever it is, how are we organizing people to retake autonomy, to restore our own sovereignty and self-determination of our bodies, right? Of our labor, which is not just our brawn or our, like the head without the heart, right? But actually fully embodied human labor that is about like getting to make decisions. Like that's real democracy, right? As like, how does this feel when I do? Does it feel good or does it feel shitty, right? And if it feels shitty, it's probably not a good thing for the other person, the land, whatever, right? That's like deep democracy. And that's what we have to move towards.
So what I want to ask you now is, the people who listen to our show, it's called How to Survive the End of the World. Mm-hmm. And we're really oriented towards what are, like, we've really split, right? We're like, we could go in the route of like very technical skills. Here's how you grow things. Here's how you do stuff. And we're really considering developing a toolbox around that, and would love to talk with y'all about that. And Autumn and I have both really felt like we need to understand how to feel into and talk about, and like what are the things we need to be concerned with. But there are a lot of people who come who love emergent strategy or love consensus work that Autumn has done or love what Aorta is up to or love, like there's organizers who are coming from a lot of different paths into listening to our shows. And then there's a lot of other people like artists and, just there's all kinds of folks who are listening. Yeah. So I would love if you could give us some like, here's some steps, right? So if you are already an organizer with an organization, here's where to, here's the next move. If you're an individual who's not yet tied into an organization, which I really think that permanent organizing structure is so important to find your way into a community. So then what do you do if you're in that space? And then even if you're like, I'm an artist, I don't necessarily think of myself as an organizer or, I'm out here living my life, I'm an architect or something, do I just go along for the ride? Like, how can I meaningfully contribute to this moment?
Right on. Yeah. So the way I think about transition is like everything needs to shift.
Yes. Yeah.
So wherever you are, there's a role for you.
Yeah.
And historically, our movements have done best when we support people in whatever hats they wear and whatever roles they're playing in the current system and society. They figure out, like, we need to figure out, like, what's the way for me to, like, how do I think about transitioning either this industry or this way of relating to each other or, any of that. So in South Africa, where, it's like sectors of society. If you're a young person, here's a way to jump in. If you're an engineer or a, taxi driver, And so that's the first thing, is just like think about like where you are and what and learn and study and talk with other people that do that work with you. Use the organizing structures that you've already set up, you know, whether it's even like lunch break groups and brown bags or
That's right.
And then if you are already if you're already part of an organization, which includes unions, right? I think unions can be a really critical place for workers to get organized around how we transition.
Yeah.
And one of the, one of my teachers in a way was came from the oil and chemical atomic workers. Let's just say that again. Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, OCAW, in Los Angeles in the 90s. Tony Mazzocchi was a leader of that union and forged some of the first like just transition strategies and frameworks. As he saw, like, it's messed up, right? I don't know if we can say fucked up?
We can say fucked up. Michelle, I especially want to hear you say fucked up.
It's fuckery, right? That our people are placed in these jobs that is like just destroying their bodies, their lungs. Their children have asthma on the outside of the fences, like all of these things for a job, a job, right? And that's the only way we're allowed to live, is if we do that kind of work. And Tony Mazzocchi saw like, oh no, it's not the workers that should have to bear the brunt of closing these industries down. We need the workers to actually lead what a vision can be for transitioning these industries out, right?
That's right.
And that continues to be, I think, part of, a just transition vision, is like, how can the workers in the refineries, in the coal mines, be a part of envisioning what they want for their communities and then designing those things and taking their skill sets, Pipe fitters can become whole new, like gray water plumbers, you know, and support training up a whole new generation of of folks.
I think it's so important to, I want to just deepen into that moment of like, that folks we think of as workers, should you push the door closed? That folks we think of now as like workers often are not also people we think of as visionaries, right? And that it's like, oh, if you're a worker, you're just a worker, you're just a cog in someone else's wheel, versus, oh, I'm a worker, I'm the reason that the world can move. I'm the reason that everything can happen. How do I want to, it's like, because I think that there's so much we can learn from people who are like, I use my body and my mind and my life to change the world. Like, that's what I do all the time. Like, and the workers are visionaries, or can be, should be invited into being visionaries. So I love that aspect of this transitional moment that y'all are guiding us and leading us in.
Right on. Yeah, and then just to continue with that, I mean, artists have been already such a vital source of like wisdom and spreading through culture, messaging, memes, like lessons from what we're all learning around principles of ecology and how that connects to the kind of campaign, like not just campaigns, but the kind of movement building that we want to do around divesting from prisons and winning abolition. Like,
exactly.
Those kinds of connections around need to continue to be made, and we don't need them to be in 20-page like articles necessarily. So that's been a really powerful way for artists to connect. And would love to have just more of that.
That's great.
And then the other thing is like, if you're a teacher, if you're a childcare worker, if you're an organizer, like, look at the stuff that's out there on just transition, and then like figure out how to use it and talk about it with your base. Right. We need more like translations in a way, and interpretations of this way of thinking and this new worldview of like, we're in a moment of transition, and the question is it going to be just? Right. And so,
which I think is so important. It's like, I think this is the piece, and you hear it in the training, you tell it so many times, and like, it's the piece that shook me the hardest. It's like, there's a certain amount of what is coming to us that like, no matter what, if we were all to just like tomorrow get everything in right relationship, turn it off, like throw away our phones, whatever, there's still the tail of what we've been up to for the last 40 years, particularly, that is going to now shift what our future and our children's and children's futures look like. And I feel like that piece is so important to me, that it's like putting our heads in the sand, like kind of ostriching out, like, well, it's too overwhelming. Fuck it. I can't do anything about it. It's like, whether you think you can or can't do anything about it, this is coming, and it's going to barrel through your life, you know, and it's going to change the conditions that you think you're used to. Yeah. So it's like, that's going to happen anyway. And I think of that Audre Lorde talks about, you know, you're going to be afraid anyway. You might as well speak. You might as well do something. And I feel like so much of y'all's invitation is like, this transition is going to happen anyway. Yeah. We might as well fight as hard as we can for it to be just, and to put ourselves amongst the people who will survive it, you know? So last thing is, what brings you joy inside of the movement generation work, inside of like the groups that you're getting to support. You know, what you're bringing to people is such hard truth. And then I see so much joy in you and in how you move in community and how you are with people and your own children and others. And I'm just like, what brings you joy? How do you cultivate that in your life?
Yeah. I mean, I'm tearing up thinking about like, we just got back from a trip to Buffalo, New York, where we took our whole crew. There were 14 of us that rolled deep, you know, with babies and partners to take care of kids and, you know, all of that. And so I think that's like number one is like building containers of safety, dignity, and belonging is the number one way to cultivate joy and life. Yeah. And seeing each other in that, and through struggle and through conflict and all of that, just the love, right? And then that, being able to like bring that into other spaces where folks are doing such powerful work and see the beauty and the struggle and the totally different contexts that folks are in and faced with, and what they bring to that, right, has been really powerful. So I think that like just relationship is so joyful, right, when we can do it well.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be in a relationship with you. I'm so grateful for all your brilliance, and thanks for making time for this.
Can I give people like a plug?
Oh yeah. So how can people find out more? I always forget. I'm like, this is why I'm not an actual reporter. So how can people find out more about Movement Generation, and also how can people support Movement Generation? Because I feel like what y'all are doing is crucial. Like, anyone who wants to stay alive on the planet should be donating to support the work also. So like, how do people find out more? How do people get involved in the work you're doing, and how can people support it?
Right on. Yeah, so check out our website, of course, just movementgeneration.org. We have an Instagram, Facebook page, so follow those. Sign up for our listserv. Right. Donate on the website. Also follow the Climate Justice Alliance, which is like one of the most crucial alliances we are part of and support to build a frontline rooted translocal movement that's taking this vision and implementing it. Awesome. And then if you're an artist or you're putting stuff out, like tag it with the hashtag Just Transition so we can follow each other and just like be on the same page across communities and across struggles.
Excellent. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Love you.
Love you too, Adrienne. Thank you.
Yay! We did it.
Thanks for listening to our show. We're on Twitter and Instagram at End of the World PC. We're also on Facebook at End of the World Show.
If you're moved by how to survive the end of the world, we invite you to become a sustainer of our work. There's no amount that's too low to be a contribution to helping us be able to pull this off. And you can give to us at patreon.com/endoftheworldshow.
There might be an amount though that's too low to like give. Like if you try to do like a negative amount, then like you can't.
Right. You know what? I never thought about that. All you negative givers,
don't do
you're
that.
Takers. Don't just be a taker.
Another helpful thing you can do to help our show sustain itself is to write us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you're an iPhone person, thanks for doing that.
This podcast is produced and edited by the Giving Tree himself, Zach Rosen.
Music for today's show is from Tunde Alaniran and Mother Cyborg.
And for our little Marvel comic thing today...
Hold on. It's not the Marvel comic thing. It's the Marvel movie thing.
Right. What is that thing called? What's it called? An egg?
I call it a hanging chad.
That's definitely not what anyone else wants to call it. I feel like it's like
it's like a teaser. It's a teaser.
It's a golden egg teaser thing. I bet there's an official name for that though.
There
like
is.
When it's like,
actually, I'm just gonna look it up right now.
okay.
Hold on.
So while you're looking it up, I'm just
that.
gonna say what it is, which I think this one should be a little secretive practice that you can do, that I've been doing that really helps me with just getting your apocalypse cycle of hope and hopelessness and fear in alignment with the moon. So at each new moon, committing yourself, planting the seed for some practice you want to do that gets you in right relationship with the coming apocalypse, whether it's a shift in your behavior, adding to your recycling practice, adding to your compost practice, or reaching out and finding your permanent organizing community to build with around these issues. And for each full moon, offering up some of the stress, some of the overwhelm, some of the terror that you might have to the moon to hold and to offer it up as a way to let it go so that that you can feel all of it, but still be able to do your work. Because right now we don't have the privilege, as Toni Morrison talks about, we don't have the privilege to be so scared that we can't act. So that's the invitation.
I have to say,
Is it called an egg?
Easter eggs.
Oh my God, I knew it was an egg.
I was sitting here thinking
dance.
like there's not actually
the little egg
'cause
dance.
All of these articles
either
either say end credit scene or post credit scene.
Yeah.
But this article is like blah, 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 blah. These films are known for their mind-blowing action. They're this, that, and they're Easter eggs.
This almost feels like we gave people 2 Easter eggs.
Oh, and this says while the eggs are sprinkled throughout the course of each film, you can always count on one place you'll find them. So I think the Easter egg idea can refer both to what's happening at the end of the credits, but also things that are dropped inside of the movies. Okay. This is like a whole other
situation.
Like part of
I'm just trying to be
screenwriting.
Cool, basically. It's just like there's this cool thing that happens and I want us to be part of it.
We are part of it.
Okay. Well, bye guys.
Bye.